Hello and welcome back to Juno's Musings. I'm Juno, intimacy provider and educator, here to share some of my thoughts with you about being in this industry. My hope is to support those who are new to doing this work and those who are curious about joining. I know, it's been a minute since I've been on here. I could come up with some excuses, but I won't. I'll just say that I'm excited to be back and share a topic with you that I, of course, hope will be useful for those of you watching. It's something that I go through up and down phases of still processing myself, even after almost 9 years of working in this industry. It is something that still comes up from time to time, and I think is really important for us to address. As you may have seen by the title, we are going to be talking about internalized stigma. So briefly go over what that is, how that affects intimacy providers specifically, and a few tips for how to address this. So thinking about internalized stigma, the second word there, stigma. Stigma is a mark of disgrace. So it's when we go against common social norms or social standards, and then we are judged by either individual people or larger institutions for having these identities or making certain choices. There are a lot of different groups of people who can experience stigma from our culture. So for instance, people living with addiction or people with disabilities, people of color. Because our culture, through things like television, the news, conversations with people in our lives, we hear messages about how people should and should not be. So there's a lot of stereotypes, let's say, about people living with addiction, why they have addiction, how they should address it, what type of person they are because they live with addiction. All of these negative stereotypes surrounding this identity and many other identities create a stigma, a negative way of viewing them, this mark of disgrace. As maybe you can guess, internalized stigma is when we hear these messages, we experience this stigma from culture and people around us, and we internalize them. So we incorporate these stigmatized identities into our perceptions of ourselves. So how we see ourselves, we feel these negative perceptions are true about us. So let's say someone living with addiction thinks that because they hear people saying you don't have willpower, or you're trapped, or whatever kind of negative stereotypes, people hear these and they take them in and they incorporate them into their own identity, their way of thinking about themselves. Experiencing internalized stigma, holding these negative perceptions about ourselves, they can affect our self-image, our relationship with ourselves, and that trickles into our relationships with other people we interact with. It can affect largely our mental health, but that trickles into our physical health as well. So AKA experiencing internalized stigma is harmful. It is not a positive thing. Now looking at internalized stigma specifically with intimacy providers, there are a lot of negative stereotypes that go around about who does this work, why we do this work, whether or not it's good if we do this work or bad if we do this work. There are so many stereotypes that are floating around the concept of intimacy provider. So they must have experienced trauma to be doing this work. They must have no self-respect if they're selling their bodies. They must have no other options. This has to be a last resort. They must be dirty and diseased, and they must be morally corrupt if they are okay with making a living this way. From media portrayals and social discussions, even just how taboo these separate topics of sex and money are, and then we combine them, it sends a lot of messages that what we do is wrong. Obviously, I don't agree with any of those. I love what I do. I am not buying into these stereotypes, but these are really common narratives that go around in our culture. And when intimacy providers hear these things, either explicitly or implicitly through all different sorts of messages, it can be really hard to not take these messages in and think, yeah, there's something wrong with me because I choose to do this work, especially if you enjoy doing the work. What's wrong with me that I like selling my body? Internalized stigma leads to different emotions, but I think one of the most harmful ones is shame. Shame is the painful feeling of thinking that you are flawed and therefore you are unworthy of love and connection and respect. I think it is unfortunately common for intimacy providers to feel shame because of the choice of work that we do. There's a lot of ways that shame has come up for me. For example, when I'm talking with a civvy person, a non-industry worker, and there's that concept of kill count or body count, which I think is a terrible way to describe how many people you've been intimate with, but let's just call it that for now. That in the past has triggered shame for me. Someone says, I've slept with 10 people. How many people have you slept with? A couple more than 10. Does that make me dirty or gross or whatever, this stereotype of, particularly for women, that, we can say a man who has a high body count is I think maybe player can have a negative connotation, but there's kind of this achievement in it, whereas for women, saying you've slept with a whole bunch of people is often stereotyped as being a slut, which has a negative connotation, and that, you're not pure anymore, you're a dirty girl. So that's an area that I've felt shame and has contributed to internalized stigma within my identity as an intimacy provider. Another experience of shame that I think is quite common for a lot of providers doing this work and can contribute to internalized stigma is body shaming. So body shaming is very common for all different types of people, again, particularly women, not just those working in this industry. Body shaming is when we are told that our body does not conform to the stereotypical ways that a body is supposed to look. So we have beauty standards in our culture that say your body should be this size, this shape, this texture and color, and if you're not abiding by those social norms, then your body is wrong. It's not a good body. So while this can affect people of all different identities, all different careers, I think it's particularly pervasive in the intimacy providing industry because we are so hyper aware of our bodies. I'm taking photos all the time. I'm looking at those photos, editing them, critiquing which ones are good enough to post, whether on my website or social media. Then I'm getting feedback on social media from other people. I'm, getting ready for clients, putting on lingerie, looking at my body in the mirror and thinking, am I feeling myself today? Is my body good enough? A couple summers ago, I gained a little bit of weight, like 5 pounds, maybe 10. And I had a review online posted about me that was generally good, but they did mention that I should learn what a gym is and go tone up, which, as you can imagine, didn't feel nice to read. And I, being a woman and intimacy provider, was hyper aware that I had gained some weight, and that body shaming did not support my journey of self-love, and it contributes to internalized stigma that there's a certain way I am supposed to be, and if I'm not being that way, I am wrong and should feel shame. Another emotion or experience that I think is really related to internalized stigma is isolation. Feeling isolated is terrible. We are connecting, community-driven creatures, and having our people is really important to our well-being. So isolation, the opposite end of this spectrum, can be a very negative, harmful experience. This isolation can be because we are explicitly rejected by people because of the work we do as intimacy providers. So say you come out to your family or your friends about what you're doing, which is a very hard thing to do, so kudos to you if you have done that. And because of this stigma in our society around this job, maybe the people who you're coming out to don't accept you and don't accept what you do, and they outwardly reject you and having an ongoing connection. So this can just obviously cause a lot of troubles in our lives, including increasing feelings of shame and internalizing that stigma that there's something wrong with me because of my choice of work. Earlier I mentioned how shame is the feeling of being flawed and therefore being unworthy of love and respect. So even if we're not being explicitly isolated by other people, I think that internalized stigma and the shame that it brings and this feeling of being flawed and unworthy can cause us to isolate ourselves from community. So maybe you're not out to your family and your friends and you're not sure how they would react, but you are fearful of rejection, which is valid given this stigma in our culture. And so you begin to isolate, you pull away, you connect less because, especially if this is your sole income source and you don't want to make up lies about how you're making money, how you're spending your time, what you're doing day to day, then it can be really difficult to connect with people and not be able to be your true self and say the truth. So that can cause some people to pull away from their social connections and not get explicitly isolated, but choosing to isolate ourselves. And yes, this experience of isolation, whether from other people or from ourselves, can really harm our mental well-being, our sense of self, and everything, because connection is so important. I think that's why being an intimacy provider is one of the, if not the longest running job, because we need connection. And I think now more than ever, we're having this disconnect in our culture from other people, and being able to have a deep, intimate experience with someone is so valuable. And it is a very challenging job in a bunch of different facets. And so if we are giving ourselves and connecting with other people and providing this intimate source of connection with people, for us to be able to continue to do this work, I think it is very important that we are taking care of ourselves and our own need for connection and community. So we've got the stigma that surrounds us. We can internalize this stigma, which can lead to feelings of shame and experiences of isolation. As you can gather, this is all not ideal. What can we do about it? I think the biggest thing is building safe community. So whether that is going to intimacy provider advocacy community groups and being able to educate on the realities of the work and how to find people to connect with, or who are allies in the industry, allies of the industry. I have, the last few years, been quite active on social media, and I have connected with a lot of really amazing providers and built really strong friendships. I would say pretty much all my friends in Toronto are industry workers, and I'm so grateful for them because they really help to normalize the work for me. We talk about, I'm trying this for marketing, or I had this happen with a client, or I had this happen with a client. And being able to connect and see that you're not alone in the work that you do, you're not alone in your experiences. While yes, your experiences are uniquely yours, there are people who have comparable ones, and you're not a freak or a degenerate, or there's nothing wrong with you because of the choice of work that you are doing. So I think educating yourself on how these stigmas are present and how they can affect you, doing a lot of self-reflection, ideally if you're able, getting a intimacy provider safe therapist who you can work through these feelings of shame and isolation with, and then building community with other providers who can provide great source of fun and support and normalize that this work is real work. Whether you've been in the industry for a while or you're brand new or you're still considering joining, I hope that some of what I've said today is useful for your journey. And I don't know when I'll be back, but hopefully I will see you again soon. And I love feedback. I love hearing from you. If you want more of these videos, please reach out and tell me, because that will encourage me to do it, knowing that someone is watching and someone is finding some help in this.